What if the most cherished figures of the Golden Age were hiding double lives so explosive they made today's celebrity scandals look like a bedtime story? Behind the glamour and glitter, family secrets lurked, so shocking that palaces spent millions to bury them, leading to cover-ups, betrayal, and a lifelong target for international spies. The disobedient princess, hedonism, and the mystique. Cover-up. For years, Princess Margaret, Queen Elizabeth II's younger sister, occupied an unusual position in the British royal family, the source of honor's antithesis. Margaret was undoubtedly an intelligent woman, possessing a quick wit and an engaging personality, but her role forced her into a life of perpetual friction, characterized by wild swings between playfulness and seriousness that often left those around her confused and unable to predict her next move. The impulsive remarks she made frequently became headlines, producing in the public eye a distorted personality that bore little resemblance to the woman known to her family. Yet, Margaret herself seemed to relish her status as a disobedient spirit. According to biographer Theo Aronson, she once told the French poet and filmmaker Jean Cocteau, "Disobedience is my joy." This spirit of defiance was a consistent thread throughout her life, often clashing directly with the ancient protocols of the monarchy and establishing her early reputation as the ultimate royal rebel. This joy in disobedience found its ultimate expression far from the constant scrutiny of London, on a small, secluded island in the Caribbean called Mustique. Starting in the 1950s, Margaret spent nearly 30 years cultivating Mustique as a private sanctuary, a place where she could shed the rigid expectations of the palace and behave exactly as she wished, free from the constant judgment of the press and the clergy. The appeal of the island was its complete seclusion and the privacy it afforded, a world away from the pervasive oversight of the court, giving her an invaluable sense of autonomy. Unlike in London, where her every move was watched, there the princess could fully indulge her whims and party to her heart's content, escaping the pervasive sense of being constantly judged and scrutinized by the public and the establishment. She owned a vacation home there, and the handful of wealthy householders on the island would take turns hosting drinks and parties every evening, creating a non-stop social calendar utterly unlike the structured, reserved life at Kensington Palace. According to accounts from staff and workers on the island, the parties Margaret hosted and attended were often extravagant, lavish, and wild, a stark contrast to her dignified public life. Witnesses recalled instances where men and women, including the princess, would be without their clothes, engaging in intimate activities, pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable for a royal. The men would even be balancing drinks on their aroused bodies, demonstrating a deliberate abandonment of formality and a pursuit of pure hedonistic pleasure. Her lady-in-waiting and her staff would often participate in what was happening, and people were often specially flown in to entertain the princess and the other 15 wealthy householders. She spent almost 30 years living this life, indulging and partying every night, engaging with her staff, all while maintaining her official royal profile in Britain and attending formal functions in London, perfecting the art of the double life. The American writer Gore Vidal observed that when one sister must be the queen, the source of all that is good, the other must inevitably be the focus of the most creative malice, the supposed evil sister. Margaret's double life was typical of Hollywood's own troubled royals, like the identity crises faced by Merle Oberon, who hid her true origins, or the secret families concealed by Clark Gable and Loretta Young. These celebrities, too, understood the immense pressure and psychological cost of maintaining a flawless public facade that masked a chaotic private existence. However, when one lives such a free existence, there are always individuals poised to take advantage, especially during an era of global espionage. The early 1960s, which marked the height of the Cold War, saw London designated as the global spy capital, a nexus of international intrigue and intelligence gathering. This secretive network soon zeroed in on the royal circle, seeking any potential leverage or means of blackmail that could be used against the British government and the crown. The net was cast by a Russian operative named Ivanov, a spy at the center of the Profumo and Christine Keeler scandal that caused a disturbance in the Tory government. The GRU, Russia's foreign military intelligence, targeted the royal family, and they did not have far to look when it came to Princess Margaret, whose lifestyle was an open secret among high society, but deeply vulnerable to exposure. The spy was introduced into the royal circle by Stephen Ward, a society osteopath and occasional organizer of parties, who became famous for his wild weekend gatherings. These parties involved many celebrities and members of the royal family, and Ward provided many young women whom he called popsies for his guests. Almost any kind of intimate conduct was accepted at these gatherings, making them ripe for exploitation and secret photography. Crucially, Ward collected photographs of these parties, pictures that held incriminating evidence of Margaret's private life. In a chilling twist, Ward mysteriously succumbed from a barbiturate overdose only hours after he said he would publish the pictures and names. Ivanov later disclosed that they had material that was devastating for the royal family, information that has yet to be revealed, but which remains stored in files in Moscow, a lingering threat to the crown, and a powerful tool for potential political leverage for decades to come. For years, the Queen had a great deal of difficulty trying to keep all of Princess Margaret's scandals under wraps, as Margaret did not care about the consequences of her actions. She only wanted to be free and unshackled from royal expectation, prioritizing her personal desires over the monarchy's reputation, often forcing the palace into damage control. Aside from the threat of blackmail involving the parties, there were other exposures. Her affair with Roddy Llewellyn, a man 17 years her junior, was ultimately exposed when spy photographers took pictures of them on Mustique and publicized the relationship, confirming the rumors that had circulated for years and causing an immediate media frenzy that rocked the establishment. Yet, Margaret continued to live her spoiled, free life, loving to party to excess, drinking, smoking, and indulging without reserve. Margaret was known to involve herself with aristocrats, politicians, Hollywood stars, artists, singers, painters, inventors, and scholars. She created her own private, closed society known as the Margaret Set, a group that indulged heavily in excessive practices and intellectual pursuits, a bohemian clique that scorned rigid court life, finding her true peers outside of the aristocracy. Biographers note that the Queen had a huge amount of work cut out for her because Margaret simply did not care. She was always going to do exactly what she wanted, regardless of the political cost or the pleas of her sister, viewing her sister's efforts as part of the system that trapped her. The lap of luxury, the unbelievable morning ritual. The pressure to maintain this secrecy and uphold the royal facade demanded a level of self-absorption, a focus so intense it translated into a daily routine that defies belief. Margaret was, by all accounts, the perfect hedonist. She lived for pleasure, and she lived with excess. This spoiled existence, fueled by excess and the anxiety of keeping secrets, required a level of self-absorption that translated into unbelievable cruelty towards those she considered beneath her, a defense mechanism against her own profound vulnerabilities and a way to control her immediate environment, which was the one area of her life she felt she could fully dictate. Nothing sums up this lifestyle better than a detailed account of a typical day in her life during her latter years, a routine that suggests an individual profoundly disconnected from the world around her and the reality of normal people. She would wake up quite late, typically between 10 and 11 o'clock in the morning, where she would be roused with orange juice and a tray delivered by staff, signaling the start of her protracted awakening. She would spend time listening to music, reading the morning newspapers, scattering them all over her bedspread, and she would chain smoke cigarettes, often continuing the habit for 2 hours straight while still in bed. This chain smoking began early in her life and persisted for years, becoming a ritualistic and central part of her awakening, marking the start of a heavily orchestrated day built entirely around her comfort. Her elaborate toilette procedures would commence next. Her bath would have been run for her by staff, and her clothes would then be meticulously laid out, normally the first of 3 changes in a day, to accommodate her varied schedule and preference for immaculate presentation, demanding an incredible level of service and preparation from her staff simply to dress her. Her style was paramount. The princess became a prominent client of Christian Dior, ensuring her look was always on the cutting edge of royal fashion and solidifying the image of the elegant, glamorous royal. The routine did not end there. Before lunch, the princess would always visit her hairdresser in Knightsbridge, a necessary commitment to maintaining her glamorous image and signature Margaret look. She was demanding that everything be done properly, ensuring her appearance was flawless and suitable for her royal status, often delaying public events simply over her hairstyle, believing her image justified the delay and demonstrating her power over schedules. The extravagance of the ritual continued throughout the day. At 12:30 in the afternoon, Margaret would partake in a vodka tonic pick-me-up, signaling the start of her day's social relaxation and dependence on alcohol, which she used to cope with the immense strain of her double life and the boredom of having no official purpose. She possessed an infuriating tendency for being ridiculously late, which often meant that dinner could not begin until she arrived, as required by strict royal guidelines, a simple way she exerted her authority and ensured she remained the focal point of every event. The late British aristocrat Nancy Mitford recounted in her letters how she and her guests once had to wait hours because Princess Margaret's hairdresser was taking too long to come up with a suitable style. Dinner was meant to start at 8:30 in the evening, but that was the exact moment the hairdresser showed up, forcing the entire party to wait for the princess, a public display of her power and self-importance that few dared to challenge, establishing her as the ultimate domestic tyrant. The pampering and the spoiled existence came with a price, a profound detachment from the reality experienced by others. One of her staff recalled driving with her for 2.5 hours from Kensington Palace to Sandringham in silence, where not one word was spoken, demonstrating her aloofness and her complete disregard for the comfort or presence of her subordinates. To Margaret, the individuals performing their duties, her footman, her driver, were invisible. Her footman could be in the room, but to Margaret, there was nobody there, highlighting her isolation from the common world and her inability to acknowledge service staff as human beings, viewing them merely as extensions of her privilege, a necessary tool for her extravagant lifestyle. This treatment was noted even by her own circle. Her husband, Lord Snowden, often criticized her extreme rudeness to staff. Another complexity to go along with this life was her preference for female lovers. Margaret, always searching for freedom from convention, also developed a preference for female partners. Biographers from the royal house alleged that the royal family allowed Margaret's intimate relationships because they felt more confident that she would not become pregnant, which was a major concern with potential male partners. The Queen would not have to face another constitutional crisis over a royal child born out of wedlock, especially following the trauma of the Townsend affair. This conduct was preferred because it was much easier to control than relationships with men, where the threat of an illegitimate child was a significant scandal risk and harder to contain, making male companions a higher security risk. The family reasoned that if she were caught with a woman, they could simply dismiss it as, "Oh, it is just her friend, one of her good friends," a convenient cover story that the public was expected to accept, maintaining a facade of moral rectitude. They believed this conduct provided a safer channel, a tried and tested way of avoiding the public embarrassment of a pregnancy or consulting with playboys. The relationships were generally very underground. According to these biographers, women later confirmed they were in relationships with the princess. Even on Mustique, people confirmed that she would be unrestrained when she had a couple drinks and recreational substances. The palace seemed to prefer this situation because it was much easier to control than the situations involving men, where pregnancy and traveling with them created more complications and media scrutiny, further illustrating the level of calculated control over the royal image, even in the private choices of the sovereign's sister, whose every move was a political calculation. The crown of thorns, the narcissist and her sharp tongue. This spoiled existence, fueled by excess and the anxiety of keeping secrets, required a level of self-absorption that translated into unbelievable cruelty, earning her the label of mean narcissist from royal psychiatrists. These analysts, who studied her behavior, labeled her as a narcissist who was attention-seeking and had little regard for others. She was mean to everyone, often humiliating and rude even to her own mother. Sometimes she would find the Queen Mother watching the racing, and if Margaret thought it was boring, she would simply pick up the remote and change the channel. A childish yet powerful act of defiance that showcased her domestic tyranny. She did love her mother deeply, but was difficult with her. She also often exhibited staggering rudeness to the household staff, acting as if they were beneath her notice and unworthy of basic respect, compounding her reputation for aloofness. Margaret's former husband, photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones, the future Lord Snowden, once asked her, "Do you know who you are speaking to?" Margaret shot back, "Oh no, you are not. You are speaking to Her Royal Highness, Princess Margaret, sister to the Queen. And do not you ever forget it," establishing an unbridgeable distance even in private arguments. This obsession with rank meant that even in intimate settings, even when partying loosely on Mustique, Margaret demanded that all other residents and friends refer to her as Her Royal Highness. According to some sources, she would instantly ruin the fun if anyone forgot to use her proper title, demanding adherence to protocol even when it was inconvenient for everyone else, highlighting her deep insecurity about her status and need for constant validation. This sense of entitlement led to numerous documented incidents of her sharp tongue aimed at celebrities, who, ironically, represented the freedom she craved but could never attain. In his book, Princess Margaret, a biography, royal expert Theo Aronson described an incident at a Beverly Hills hotel party where Her Royal Highness sent an authoritative message across the room to the legendary singer Judy Garland, stating, "I want to hear you sing." Garland, a star in her own right, was not amused. Her reply, delivered back to the princess, was, "Tell her I will sing if she christens a ship first," a witty rebuke that put the royale in her place, and highlighted the difference between inherited and earned fame. The princess, who came to America to socialize with Hollywood stars, expected them to treat her like staff, despite their own success and wealth. She would literally treat them like her slaves or her staff, refusing to acknowledge their professional status as equals. The model Twiggy, a major fashion icon in the 1960s, endured a similarly embarrassing encounter at a London party. After ignoring Twiggy for 2 hours, Princess Margaret turned to her and asked, "Who are you?" When Twiggy responded, "My name is Leslie Hornby, ma'am, but most people know me as Twiggy." Margaret offered a curt reply before walking away and ignoring her for the remainder of the night. How unfortunate. When the princess met Elizabeth Taylor for dinner, she reportedly told the actress that the 33.19-carat diamond ring her husband, Richard Burton, had given her was vulgar. Taylor, known for her quick wit, reportedly replied, "Ain't it great?" before inviting Margaret to try it on her own hand. Taylor then cracked, "Not so vulgar now, is it?" successfully turning the tables on the critique and exposing Margaret's poor taste. And when the princess met the actress Grace Kelly, Margaret reportedly remarked, "You do not look like a movie star." Kelly replied, "Well, I was not born a movie star," defending her professional ascent and implicitly criticizing Margaret's inherited status, a devastating comment that touched upon Margaret's core insecurity. Clinical psychologist Oliver James, who analyzed Princess Margaret's life, traced the roots of this narcissistic condition back to a deep inferiority distilled from childhood. She always felt she was the second-hand, second-best person in the family. To a normal psychologist, Margaret's diagnosis would have been narcissistic personality disorder, someone who has to be the center of attention and is incredibly erratic in their moods. The roots of this were simple. Narcissists are living in their own world with the dictum, "I am perfect." Helena Bonham Carter, who played the princess in the series The Crown, suggested that Margaret's short temper and obsession with rank were attempts to control the few things she could, noting, "If you have very little control in your life, you often end up controlling what little you can." Margaret's life was indeed one without much agency, and her cruelty was the tragic result of this internal power struggle, a way to lash out at the golden cage that contained her and defined her existence. If you are finding this exploration into the human cost of royal duty and fame compelling, please consider pressing the subscribe button below. It helps us continue bringing you these Golden Age files that reveal the full, complicated humanity behind the legends. Pride and prejudice, the hypocrisy of the new generation. Yet, the woman who demanded constant reverence and lived such a volatile private life showed surprising cruelty when faced with the scandals of the next generation of royals. By the 1990s, Princess Diana was the most famous princess in the world, a position once occupied by Margaret herself, who had been the youthful darling of the 50s. With Diana and Sarah Ferguson, Fergie, the Duchess of York, capturing all the press attention, Margaret became plain jealous. Her jealousy manifested as outrage and hypocrisy, creating a firestorm of judgment within the palace walls. She was deeply unsympathetic towards their behavior, condemning Diana for giving an interview about Prince Charles's affair with Camilla, and condemning Fergie for being caught having an adulterous relationship. Margaret saw their actions as embarrassing the royal family, believing they were sullying the institution she, despite her rebellion, still fiercely protected. She was completely overlooking the glaring irony that her own affairs and hedonistic antics had arguably done far more to damage the royal reputation decades earlier. Everyone was asking, "Isn't it ridiculous that you are saying this about them?" Given her own history of public defiance, pointing out the stark double standard she was applying. The real source of Margaret's ire was not the scandal itself, but the public reaction to it, which was notably softer and more sympathetic than the judgment Margaret had faced. Diana and Fergie were likable. The attention was no longer on Margaret, who was getting older and increasingly marginalized within the narrative of the monarchy. Here was a new, young, beautiful, fresh Diana, whom people actually liked because they hadn't liked Margaret's imperious side. Diana was the opposite of Princess Margaret in her interactions with staff. She spoke to her drivers, she spoke to her chefs, and she was warm and affectionate, winning over the staff who often felt ignored by the older royals, contrasting sharply with Margaret's aloofness. Everyone loved her, from her staff to her own children, whereas the older generation of royals were cold and aloof, looking down upon others. The public was far more forgiving of Fergie and Diana because they were approachable, down-to-earth, and respectful of all people, contrasting sharply with Margaret's imperious manner and demands for protocol. This popularity irked Margaret, who had been routinely trashed and tarnished by the press herself when she was the source of scandal. She was jealous that the media was not willing to tarnish Diana's name as they had damaged hers. Margaret was extremely irritated because Fergie was also warm and inviting and nice to staff and not what people were used to from royals, who traditionally maintained a sense of superiority and distance, demonstrating a profound inability to accept the changing times. Biographers note the great irony. You would think that Margaret, having gone through all of this, the intense media scrutiny, the moral condemnation and the public shaming might have been kindly and a wee bit benevolent to these women, but she was quite harsh towards them, feeling that they should have endured the same scrutiny and silence that she had been subjected to, reflecting her internalized bitterness toward the system and her own suffering. The press attention around the United Kingdom was entirely focused on Diana and Fergie, and Margaret was plain jealous and unsympathetic toward their behavior, unable to offer the solidarity that her own past might have suggested. Her anger and sense of injustice were driven by the fact that the media and the public had accepted and even embraced the new, young, beautiful princesses, shifting the focus away from her and highlighting her own failure to secure popular affection despite her efforts at glamour and charisma. The press had loved Diana and was not willing to tarnish her name the way they had tarnished Margaret's all the time, adding to Margaret's sense of betrayal by the public and the press who had once adored her, confirming her fear that she was ultimately dispensable. Her resentment made her a formidable opponent to the younger women within the palace. Margaret's hypocrisy was a function of her own lack of fulfillment. Diana and Fergie were pursuing their lives and trying to find happiness, even if it meant breaking royal protocol. But Margaret was trapped by the very protocols she pretended to uphold, having made the ultimate sacrifice years earlier. It created an immense bitterness that manifested as condemnation toward those who were achieving the freedom she never could, highlighting the psychological cost of her own self-imposed imprisonment and her failure to truly break free from the constraints of the monarchy. Her judgment of Diana and Fergie was, in essence, a condemnation of her younger self for not escaping her gilded cage. The King's Joy, a childhood defined by the crown. To understand the bitterness and the need for control, we must look to the paradox of her privileged yet restrictive childhood. Princess Margaret was born on the 21st of August in 1930 at Glamis Castle in Scotland. Her parents were the Duke and Duchess of York, who were seen by the public as the perfect family, and Margaret was affectionately known as Margot. Her mother, the Duchess of York, later the Queen Mother, was largely in charge of her education, which consisted mostly of private tutoring, focused on turning her daughters into well-mannered young ladies, suitable for their roles rather than academic pursuits. Margaret grew to harbor bitterness towards her mother for not providing her with a better, more formal education, feeling ill-equipped compared to her peers, and often regretting the gap in her learning, which affected her confidence later in life. The sisters were each other's best friend, sharing the isolation of palace life. But Margaret was her father's favorite. King George VI once said, "Elizabeth is my pride, but Margaret is my joy," a quote that perfectly encapsulated the different expectations placed upon them. Elizabeth was the serious, dutiful heir, while Margaret was the spontaneous, indulged favorite who was expected only to be charming. Margaret was born into a family that was not destined to wear the crown. She was the second in line to the throne. But the cozy, family-oriented world of the Yorks was turned on its head in 1936 when Edward VIII abdicated the throne to marry Wallis Simpson. This unexpected event changed everything. Suddenly, Margaret's father became King George VI, and her older sister, Elizabeth, became the heir to the throne. This event profoundly changed Margaret's trajectory. While Elizabeth was now burdened with the pressure of duty, Margaret found herself in the confusing role of the spare, the one with all the privilege but none of the responsibility, creating an emotional vacuum that drove her to seek attention and drama to define her purpose and gain validation. Margaret's father spoiled her by allowing her to take chances not usually permitted, such as staying up late for dinner at the age of 13, indulging her playful nature and rebellious streak. Marion Crawford, the former royal governess, wrote that Margaret does draw all the attention, a characteristic Margaret learned to exploit for validation. Elizabeth did not mind this, commenting, "Oh, it is so much easier when Margaret's there. Everybody laughs at what Margaret says," indicating Margaret's natural ability to command a room, even within her own family, which would prove to be a double-edged sword. It was during this period of wartime upheaval and palace reorganization that a handsome war hero was hired, Group Captain Peter Townsend. He was a war hero, a highly skilled man from the military, who arrived at Buckingham Palace in 1944. He was 30 years old at the time, 15 years Margaret's senior. Margaret, then a young girl, quickly developed a deep affection for the older man, who served as an equerry to her father, the king. The king reportedly saw the cool and collected combat veteran as the son he never had, forging a close relationship that gave Townsend privileged access to the family's private moments and to Margaret. Townsend was constantly seen with Margaret, but was initially ignored by the press as a potential love interest because he was married and Margaret was still a young girl. The king may have known about his daughter's puppy love, But it was not until Townsend learned his wife was having an extramarital affair, which conveniently ended soon after, that their rumored friendship began to grow into something deeper. After Townsend's divorce was finalized in December of 1952, rumors began to spread about him and Margaret. The couple's shared grief over the passing of the king in February of 1952. Margaret was devastated by the passing of her beloved father, may have helped them grow closer in the privacy of Clarence House, where they often retreated for solace and shared grief. Townsend described Margaret as a woman of unusual, intense beauty, centered about large eyes, generous, sensitive lips, and a complexion as smooth as a peach. But what ultimately made the princess so attractive and lovable was that behind the dazzling facade, the apparent self-assurance, one could find a rare softness and sincerity. Qualities Townsend valued deeply, seeing past her royal mask and finding the vulnerable woman beneath. If you have been surprised by Princess Margaret's double life, please comment below and let us know which of these revelations stunned you the most. We would also love to hear which Golden Age Hollywood star's hidden life you would like us to explore next in a future video. Duty and betrayal, the Townsend tragedy and the Snowden collision. The budding romance with Townsend would become the ultimate test of Margaret's commitment to her heart or to the crown. The relationship, which blossomed during a period when Margaret was fighting for her freedom, quickly became a national crisis that threatened to destabilize the monarchy. Townsend was 15 years older than her and a divorcee with 2 children, conditions that made their marriage almost impossible under the rules of the time and within the rigid constraints of the Church of England, which fundamentally opposed divorce and viewed the royals as moral arbiters. The Royal Marriages Act of 1772 stated that the Queen, Margaret's sister, had to consent to the marriage, placing the ultimate burden on Elizabeth and forcing her to choose between her sister and her sacred constitutional role. The Church of England, of which the Queen was the supreme governor, would not allow divorced people to remarry, creating a monumental obstacle that touched the Queen's sacred duty. The royal house, including Prince Philip, was said to be mostly against the union, not only because of the divorce, but because Townsend lacked wealth and skills that would allow him to provide for Margaret, meaning she would need a greater allowance from Parliament, creating a financial and political headache that the government wished to avoid. To avoid a public denial, the Queen told the couple to wait until Margaret turned 25, at which point they would not need her approval to marry, hoping the problem would resolve itself either by separation or public acceptance. This way, the Queen wouldn't have to publicly say that she disliked her sister's marriage, protecting her own constitutional position. However, the Church remained resolute, stating that if Margaret married a divorced man, she would not be able to take communion, threatening her spiritual life. Margaret was also told she would have to renounce her rights of succession and lose her annual civil list allowance of 6,000 euros and an extra allowance of 15,000 euros that Parliament gave her, stripping her of her financial security and status as a working royal, a condition that deeply unnerved the extravagant princess. Margaret's love was put to the test. Townsend was sent away from the royal household to become military air attaché in Brussels, effectively exiling him from the country and separating the couple under the guise of diplomatic duty. Margaret, as the Queen's younger sister, was still powerless to make her own decisions, despite being an adult royal, feeling the immense weight of the system pressing down on her choices. She had lost her father, and now she was losing her lover. Her separation from him lasted for 2 agonizing years, during which they were forbidden to see each other, intensifying the emotional pressure and making their choice harder. When Margaret turned 25 on August 21, 1955, the world waited for the announcement, believing her time of freedom had arrived, making the crisis global and unavoidable. People waited in anticipation in the streets around Clarence House, and millions read the latest news and rumors on the front pages of newspapers every day. Townsend later wrote that they felt mute and numbed at the center of this mousetrap, overwhelmed by the global attention and the pressure from the establishment that sought to control their fate. He reflected that Margaret could have married him only if she had been prepared to give up everything, her position, her prestige, her privy purse, and he simply had no weight to withstand the pressure, realizing the sacrifice was too immense and fundamentally life-altering for the princess accustomed to luxury. The weight of the crown proved too heavy. On October 31, 1955, Margaret issued a statement that shocked the nation, ending the intense speculation. "I would like it to be known that I have decided not to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend. I have been aware that subject to my renouncing my rights of succession, it might have been possible for me to contract a civil marriage, but mindful of that Church's teaching that Christian marriage is indissoluble and conscious of my duty to the Commonwealth, I have resolved to put these considerations before others." Townsend recalled, "We had reached the end of the road. Our feelings for one another were unchanged, but they had incurred for us a burden so great that we decided together to lay it down, marking the end of their affair, but confirming that their personal feelings remained intact. Yet, the romantic notion that Margaret sacrificed her great love for duty is complicated by biographers who suggest this is nonsense. If she had been truly in love, she would have given everything up, as the price was ultimately the loss of her superior position, a price she wasn't willing to pay, choosing comfort and status over personal happiness, a decision that would haunt her. Within 3 months of renouncing Townsend, Margaret was unofficially engaged to a playboy named Billy Wallace, demonstrating her emotional volatility and immediate need for distraction. The revenge came fast. In 1958, Margaret met the photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones at a dinner party. Margaret reportedly accepted his proposal the day after hearing from Townsend that he planned to marry a young Belgian woman who was half his age and greatly resembled Margaret, perhaps seeking to reclaim control of her narrative and secure her future before Townsend secured his, driven by a wounded ego. Their engagement announcement on February 26, 1960, caught the media by surprise, as the relationship had been kept secret, intensifying the buzz and shocking the conservative elements of society. They were married at Westminster Abbey in May of 1960. The marriage was seen as a sign of the decline of social stratification, as Tony was the first person without a title, a commoner, to marry into the royals for 400 years, bringing a bohemian flair to the royal family and making their union a symbol of the swinging 60s, defying the stiff traditions of the court. This marriage, however, quickly spiraled into a mutually destructive affair. Tony was a man with an enormous attraction to others, and many people believed he was bisexual, a secret that added immense pressure to the marriage and gave him an outlet Margaret did not share. The saying went, "If it has socks on, he will jump on it," a testament to his relentless infidelity. His secret life was soon public, as he reportedly conceived a child by the wife of his best friend during his engagement to Margaret, a child born while he and Margaret were on their honeymoon, a scandalous start that Margaret had to endure silently and publicly ignore. Tony's infidelities, including liaisons with both men and women, were relentless and continued throughout the marriage. The most extraordinary thing about their numerous affairs was that they frequently threw them in each other's faces, using their infidelity as a weapon of emotional damage. Tony took to leaving hurtful notes on her desk, including one headed 24 Reasons Why I Hate You, which deeply upset her, highlighting the cruelty of their life together. The emotional violence of their relationship climaxed in one exchange when Margaret mentioned a male friend of Tony's she had slept with, to which Tony immediately shot back, "Well, I slept with him as well," demonstrating the toxic nature of their union and the psychological warfare they engaged in, turning their private lives into a battleground. By the early 1970s, they were emotionally distant. Margaret, for her part, had her own liaisons. The Snowdens were so at odds that Lord Snowden would hide abusive messages in Margaret's belongings. Margaret had an affair with Bordeaux wine producer Anthony Barton and wrote very personal letters to Douglas Home, who took his own life 18 months after his breakup with Margaret, highlighting the tragic emotional collateral of her life and her relationships. In September of 1973, Margaret met Roddy Llewellyn, a man 17 years her junior. Their friendship, which Margaret described as a loving relationship, involved frequent trips to Mustique. In February of 1976, a swimsuit photograph of Margaret and Llewellyn on Mustique made the cover of the News of the World. Margaret was portrayed as a predatory older woman, and Llewellyn as her toy boy. This affair was the final breaking point. On March 19, 1976, the Snowdens made their separation public, causing another global media storm. Some elected officials proposed removing Margaret from the population register, and members of parliament called her a royal parasite and a floozy. The divorce was finalized in July of 1978, ending the tumultuous marriage and Margaret's status as a publicly married woman, finally freeing her from Tony. The unfulfilled life, the final years, and Elizabeth's tears. The emotional and physical toll of Margaret's life, of excess, duty, and emotional violence finally caught up to the princess in a tragic decline. Her lifelong habit of chain smoking, which started in her youth, took a severe toll on her health. She never gave up the habit for years. In January of 1985, she underwent an operation to remove a portion of her left lung, eerily similar to the one her father underwent more than 30 years before. Though she finally gave up smoking in 1991, she never cut back on her heavy alcohol consumption, continuing the lifestyle of excess that had defined her adult years. She struggled with nervous breakdowns, depression, migraines, laryngitis, and bronchitis, enduring years of poor health and hospital stays, seeking solace and struggling with dependence. In January of 1993, she was hospitalized for pneumonia. In February of 1998, she suffered a minor stroke and sustained severe scalds to her feet in a bathroom accident early the following year. which limited her ability to walk and necessitated the use of a wheelchair. A further stroke on January 10, 2001, left her unable to eat or swallow, leading to her hospitalization. By March of 2001, multiple strokes had left her partially blind and paralyzed on her left side, leaving her physically devastated and dependent on constant care, a shadow of her former glamorous self. Her final public appearance, in August of 2001, at her mother's 101st birthday celebration, shocked the nation. The public saw a woman who looked older than her mother, frail, and sometimes unaware of what was happening around her, having to be guided by a footman standing behind her wheelchair. The princess, who had always commanded the spotlight with her effortless glamour and sharp intelligence, was reduced to a figure of profound pity, her vibrant spirit seemingly extinguished by illness and years of hardship. Princess Margaret passed away at the King Edward III Hospital in London on February 9, 2002. The date was the 50th anniversary of her father's passing, adding a layer of poignant symmetry to her passing. She had suffered another stroke, followed by cardiac problems, marking a profoundly sad end to her complicated life. Several foreign leaders and members of parliament from the United Kingdom expressed their sorrow at her passing, acknowledging her unique place in the country's history and her cultural impact. Her cousin, Lord Lichfield, later said that Margaret was pretty sad towards the end of her life because it was a life unfulfilled, an assessment shared by many who knew her best, believing she never achieved the lasting happiness she sought, caught between duty and desire. Yet, the depth of her character was ultimately revealed at her funeral. Queen Elizabeth II, known for her extraordinary stoicism throughout war and personal tragedy, was seen wiping tears from her face with a handkerchief. It was one of the few times the Queen was ever observed crying in public, a raw moment that underscored the strength of the bond between the two sisters, a bond that had endured every scandal and crisis from childhood to the grave. Margaret's bond with Elizabeth was the strongest and most meaningful relationship of her life, and the Queen truly did try to look out for her, even while constrained by her constitutional duty, always prioritizing her sister's welfare within the limits of the crown. The life of a royale was tough. The Queen was controlled by clergymen and nobles who dictated whom she married, what she did, and what she said. The fact that Margaret was separated from the love of her life created a bitterness that led to her disdain for life, making her refuse to conform, believing she had been denied her chance at happiness and freedom. The ultimate tragedy of Princess Margaret is that her tremendous charisma and intelligence were squandered by a system that robbed her of her freedom, creating a disdain that fueled her self-destructive, glamorous defiance. She paid a staggering personal cost for a system she was born to serve, but ultimately failed to conquer, leaving behind a complex legacy of glamour, rebellion, and profound sadness, a true golden age enigma. What a fascinating, and at times, heartbreaking journey into the gilded cage of Princess Margaret. Her life was a dazzling contradiction, a fierce spirit trapped by an ancient system, a loyal sister whose defiance created the ultimate royal scandal. If you've been captivated by the glamour, the intrigue, and the human cost of living a royal double life, don't let the story end here. Tap the subscribe button below to ensure you never miss another episode of our Golden Age Files. We're dedicated to uncovering the full, complicated humanity behind the legends and bringing you the secrets the palaces and studios paid millions to bury. Give this video a like if you were stunned by her legendary morning ritual or the tragic twist of the Townsend affair, and we want to hear from you. Comment below and let us know which of Princess Margaret's revelations shocked you the most. What other Golden Age icons' hidden life should we explore next? Thank you for watching, and join us again soon as we continue to lift the veil on the past.